The kind of thing that I really am interested in and that I really wish there was more of is people like being super vulnerable and emotional and like the kind of things that you can't usually get in metal.
Welcome to the Dreams of Consciousness podcast. If you'd be so kind, would you mind introducing yourself?
Hi, I'm Brendan Sloan, I guess, and I am convulsing for the most part.
You are convulsing, meaning that convulsing is a one-man project?
Yeah, in at least one of its incarnations, in one of the ways I think about it anyway. It's in a studio sense and in a compositional sense, it's a one-man show. When we play it live as a three-piece, which I was kind of, I guess, gently bullied into doing several years ago. I do it with two of my favorite people on planet Earth, a bass player called Peter Cosson, who's been in a lot of amazing music, involved in a lot of amazing music in Australia, and a drummer called Robin Stone, who some people may know from his tireless efforts online to enrage boomers who don't understand what blast beats are. So in that version of convulsing, it's kind of like a jazz trio where my songs are there, but we play them in whatever way suits the trio without much regard for how precisely it appears in the composition or on the record. So it's kind of like a duality of what one identity of convulsing is a solo project and the other is a trio in which we're destroying the music in some ways and making it better in others. Weird band.
Well, we can get into this more when we speak about your songwriting and your recording, but do you feel that the live version of Convulsing and the studio version of Convulsing, or the Convulsing that we hear on the recordings, are two separate experiences?
Yeah, sort of by necessity. I mean, we try to... It's neither is inferior. They just can never be the same. Because the composition process and the recording process and the whole, I guess, the artistry of convulsing is so autocratic that it would be disrespectful of me to involve my friends who I care about, who have a musical identity that I care about and that I enjoy hearing. It would be disrespectful of me to involve them in that process where I'd basically make them play what I want. But I can't extract myself from doing it all just so on the record. So they are different in that sense, where they get total freedom to do basically whatever they want with the source material when we play live. So sometimes the things that I've played on the record for drums or bass or whatever don't exist when we perform live. There's totally different rhythms, there's totally different arrangements. So I guess it's up to the audience to decide whether it's better or worse, but they're certainly different.
And I should mention that you're also in the band Altars.
Yeah.
Altars has been on this podcast. I spoke with Lewis about 2 years ago. Would you say that there's commonalities between the two bands? Like, do you and Lewis share an aesthetic or maybe a vision of what metal should be?
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is yeah, certainly. That's part of how I ended up in the band anyway, is that we have a shared vision for, I guess, art in general and the kind of art that we like to hear and the kind of art that we like to try to make. And convulsing itself is kind of part of the Ouroboros nature of Altars, in that I watched Altars play in, I think, probably 2015, maybe 16, something like that. It was one of their last shows ever before dissolving for the first time. And I took the drummer of my then band to that show and the bass player of another band called Sleep Makes Waves. I took them to watch Altars. And after that, I had the idea to start up a trio with them and try and make some music like this. It's like, we've got a perfectly good ensemble trio here. We're all interested in this music. Let's try and make it. And that didn't work out. But the embryonics of that I wrote for that trio became Convulsing. So in a weird way, Altars created Convulsing, and then my work in Convulsing created my opportunity to join Altars and resurrect Altars. And so now it's this sort of self-perpetuating machine where they're both linked.
Okay. So I'm going to ask you the question that always derails the podcast, but how would you describe Convulsing musically?
The tags on Bandcamp do the best job that I've come up with for that, like question mark metal or something, progressive metal, whatever, other tags, something like that. Because it's like, I guess the simplest answer would be the way that I think about it is extreme music. It happens to sound like metal a lot of the time. It happens to have the trademarks of like death metal, or what some people refer to as dissonant death metal, which I have a complicated relationship with. And it's aggressive, extreme music. But the kind of things that I mean when I say extreme music are it's extremes of timbre, it's extremes of emotional content for me. It's the literal extremes, like the boundary of something, or an extreme high or an extreme low. So that's the way that I think about it, is that convulsing could contain anything I want, provided I deem it to be suitably extreme in some way, like extremely quiet or extremely loud or extremely gentle. All of these things are valid to me as in terms of tools to create with. So it just so happens that most of the time I want to play a tremolo riff or something.
Right. I'm curious what metal means to you.
This is probably the question that will derail the podcast. Because there's a little cabal of two other people in it that I've had. One of whom is in a band called Sleepwalker, and the other one is in a band called Locust Leaves. And we talk nearly every day, and most of it is art philosophy and things like that. And at some point along this journey of the last, I don't know how many years, we started referring to things that feel like metal, like the pulse of metal, with crystal logic, as in like the Manila Road album title or the track.
Okay.
And it's kind of just, you could call it anything really, but it just seemed funny to us at the time because Manila Road have it. It's like, that's a cheesy fucking album, but when you put it on, within a few minutes you're like, fuck yeah, man, this is Manila Road have it, man. Like, they know how to write it, they know how to get you. There's a hook there, there's like a thread of power, some sort of energetic force coming through the music, and that exists in like Sad Wings of Destiny, it exists in Infernal Coils Within a World Forgotten, it exists in Formulas Fatal to the Flesh, it exists in that Meth record that just came out, it exists in Piron, it exists in Blind Guardian, like that whatever that is, whatever name you choose to give it, the sensation that you get when you listen to like Banished from Sanctuary off that Live in Japan Blind Guardian record, where you can hear the crowd, like the Japanese crowd screaming. That's metal. That's how I would answer that question. That's what metal feels like. But it doesn't need to come from metal. It can come from anything. You can get it, going to watch Music for 18 Musicians in a chamber somewhere. Yeah. And I certainly have had that same sensation. And I think to myself, man, that's fucking metal. This was metal. And it was like Steve Reich, repetitive chamber music.
Yeah. And when you say that you have a complicated relationship with dissonant death metal, do you just mean the classification and the way Convulsing is lumped in with other bands that you may or may not feel you have something in common with?
No, kind of, yeah. It's like, it's not, I don't have a hostile attitude towards it. And I've tried to explain it a bit more academically in recent weeks since putting this album out. It's been less than a month. It feels like it's an eternity, but I was thinking about it for 6 years. I didn't actually do anything for 5 of those years, really. I was busy with other shit, but it feels like it's been a long time. In terms of the actual question you asked me, it's because I think of dissonance as a tool, not necessarily a category or a bucket to put something in. And the way that I feel the music or a feeling, I guess, the way that I feel the music that I make is it's tension and release around something melodic. I'm trying to like play a melodic idea or communicate some sort of melodic line, whether that's complicated or simple or like a counterpoint thing or not. the dissonant elements are the things that surround it, that sort of activate a tension so that you can release the tension and get the satisfaction of having released it. So I think about it on a very sort of theoretical level like that. And I don't like how liberally it's used, I guess, to describe metal with complicated harmony or a more esoteric sounding approach to chord voicings and songwriting. I think there are very few bands that I would reliably categorize as dissonant, where that is the that is the primary tool being used, or the primary mood being created is one of dissonance. There's like, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 bands that I could think of, and not even all of them continued to do that for their whole career. So like obviously Steve Hurdle bands like Negativa and the Gorguts records that he was involved in, a lot of those are kind of dissonant compositions and use extended techniques and things like that. That's dissonant music. Or you like Christoph Penderecki's orchestral music. Like we reference Threnody for the Victims of Hiroshima quite a lot because that's dissonant fucking music. That's like clusters of really tightly voiced strings, and I think some of Luc Lemay's classical work is a bit informed by that. He's a modernist classical composer as well. So and like Coma Cluster Void, I guess, is another one. I love that band. But like the way Jean did those guitar arrangements, like those are deliberately dissonant all the time, or nearly all the time. Whereas bands like me, or what I do really in this band, and bands like Alters, and bands like even Ulcerate, or like Kvadrat, or the swathe of other bands, even Despel Omega. Like Despel Omega sounds like Orthodox church music to me. Like it's a very classical attitude to harmony and melody and tension and resolution, and it sounds grandiose and sweeping like that. And so I struggle to think of things as dissonant in the way people usually communicate it to mean like harsh and obscure and impenetrable. And I don't find any of these bands to be that. There's very few bands and very few composers I find to be deliberately obtuse and impenetrable in a way that I would be happy with calling dissonant.
False dissonant death metal?
That was a long answer, I'm sorry, but that's about as good as I can get.
No, and I appreciate you. You're actually quite eloquent with your thoughts on the matter. I mean, I don't have strong feelings about dissonant death metal one way or another. It does seem like there are a lot of bands that were kind of conflated with doing something similar and may have very little relation with each other. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I also kind of think
that's just an easy way to sorry to talk over you. That's just an easy way to help people find them. So like that's why I say I don't have a hostile attitude towards it, because you have to call something. You have to give something a name. You have to give it some sort of discovery mechanism. Otherwise, everything's death metal, and you have no way to like separate. You have no way to guide your discovery process into like finding more things like this, and that's how we have these genres in the first place. But it's dissonant death metal is just a challenging one because it uses something explicitly musicological, and frequently I'll check something out and it'll be tagged dissonant death metal, and it's entirely like this beautiful romantic composition with occasionally they'll play a tritone. I'm like, this is not fucking dissonant. There's nothing dissonant about this.
Right.
It's just this is just like cool death metal. We need another word like that better suits looking for it, so that when you say dissonant death metal, you mean fucking dissonant, and it's like it's difficult music. It's much more difficult. Anyway, that's all.
So you mentioned Penderecki. I'm only somewhat familiar with Penderecki because of Stanley Kubrick using his compositions in some of his movies.
Yeah.
But do you come from a musical background? Like, did you study music?
In a manner of speaking, I'm mostly an autodidact. But I started in a youth orchestra when I was like 10. Like some outreach people came around to my like 5th grade class and basically signed up my whole class into concert instruments. And I wanted to play saxophone because I'd heard a little bit of jazz and I liked it.
I played alto sax for 3 years.
Yeah, cool. Basically, there were too many people who wanted to play saxophone because it's a cool instrument. Like it just is, and it's really expressive. It's basically like the distorted electric guitar of the brass section, and it's not even a brass instrument really. It's technically it should be a woodwind because you use a reed. Blah blah blah. Anyway, but I ended up on the flute, and I quite like it as an instrument. But at the time, it was like 2001, 2002. And then I heard like Sepultura and Soulfly and like Roadrunner Records, new metal, kind of all at the same time. And I was like, man, I can't play a riff on a flute. Like this doesn't work for me. So at that point, I knew about Jethro Tull because my dad is like kind of into prog, like in the sense of he likes Rush and likes Jethro Tull and a few other bands, but he's not like a prog nerd in the way that I am now. And so I knew about Jethro Tull, but I was like, no, that's not acceptable. One flute in the whole canon of rock music is not enough to keep me on the flute. So I changed. I bought myself a guitar and started playing. So I come from like, at fundamental levels, I come from like an orchestral background. But most of my relationship with music comes from like trying to teach myself to shred on the internet in 2004. And I studied a little bit in high school. Like I did a proper compositional, like a classical music unit for at the very end of high school, which is like baby university in Australia. And at that point, I was like, oh shit, a rock musician shouldn't be doing this. Because I ended up transcribing like a Henrik Weinovsky scherzo to play, which is basically, it's kind of like a Paganini caprice. So I was like doing all this dumb acrobatic shred guitar shit in this musicological course. And like we studied post-romantic, like modernist classical music, post-war classical, that's what I'm going for, not post-romantic. And so there's a bit of familiarity there. And I just like watching it performed. I've gone to watch chamber ensembles do post-war classical music all the time because it's the most exciting and like evocative period. And Penderecki was like the master of that. I've got the score, the physical score of Threnody somewhere, and I'll never forget reading that score for the first time because if you haven't seen it or if the listener hasn't seen this, I encourage you to look up the sheet music to the Threnody to the victims of Hiroshima because it's like modernist avant-garde notation techniques as well, where he uses strange diagrams and thick black lines where like every line on the stave is covered in ink to indicate that the string ensemble should play as many notes as they possibly can in this huge cluster, as loud as they possibly can. And there's all these like really emotional directions in the notation. And so that at that time, when I was 17 or 18 investigating this stuff, I was also deeply investigating at that point. This is like 6 or 7 years in. Weirdo death metal and hearing all these parallels and starting to think, people need to do this. This is what death metal needs to move towards. This is what metal needs to move towards. It's get even weirder. Like somehow we were able to do it in the 80s and 90s. We had like Disharmonic Orchestra and even Atheist and like Psychotic Waltz, I guess, on the prog side. And Gorguts knew what they were doing. Luke knew what he was doing. But we just kind of put it away for a bit. And it seems like more people are catching on again now, 20 years later. They're going like, yeah, we should take this really modernist approach to death metal again. So I'm happy about it. But that's my relationship with Penderecki is I found him in high school while I was doing my brief stint as a real musician in musical studies. But I elected not to go to the conservatorium and continue my studies. I instead went and did studio work I thought that would be more interesting than a kind of stale, regimented conservatory study, I guess, because that was just a vibe that I got when I went and thought about doing it and visited and spoke to instructors and stuff. I thought, this isn't quite what I'm after. I want to skip all of the rudimentary stuff and go straight into the like weirdo shit, and that's not really something you can do at a conservatory. So I went the other route. But I'm not the only one. Like, Penderecki turns up everywhere in metal. If you listen, you can hear like little clips. Like, the most other famous one is Titan Blood, I guess. There's this the big fucking trumpet thing at the start of a Titan Blood song. You're like, yeah, here we are.
So when you say you studied studio stuff, does that mean you were studying to be an engineer, an audio engineer?
Yeah, okay. More or less.
All right.
I got inspired by like Stephen Wilson and Devin Townsend and a few other like lone wolves, I guess, that sort of write, perform, record, mix, master the whole thing top to bottom, and it has a very specific sound and like sonic signature when you do that. Even Steve Vai sort of does that. He hands off the mixes quite a lot, but there's a few people who do the stuff that you can tell it's them. They did it all because it's all got the same sort of artistic hand. You can feel it. So I was inspired to pursue studio stuff rather than the instrumental, and continue just like fucking around on my guitar and learning it that way, and went and did a formal sort of, or as formal as you can get, studio education.
And I believe we touched on this earlier, but in addition to playing all the instruments for Convulsing, you also handle all the recording as well as the mixing and mastering. Yeah,
it's, I mean, Convulsing, it's not really a high production sort of endeavor. Quite a lot of it happens within the DAW. Like, I think this one, the one Perdurance, probably has the least amount of microphones actually used. Because the guitar tracks, I used my real gear, but all of the actual sounds are from impulse responses that I created of my stuff, so that I could basically work quietly in this unit block that I moved into in Victoria. So I didn't actually put a microphone on anything except my own voice this time, where in previous records I at least put a mic on a guitar cabinet, or, you know, it's to say that I recorded is a stretch. But we did, however, engineer in a classical kind of Steve Albini analog console way with ribbon mics and outboard gear. We did the full works for the last Alters record, so I feel like a big boy engineer on that one. This one, not so much.
Okay. Sorry, you used a term that I'm not familiar with. What did you mean by the responses?
Impulse
responses?
So, cab simulation, basically.
Okay, I see.
An impulse response is, in the audio sense, it's like you play a sweep of every frequency or a short burst of like pink noise in an environment, and you capture that with a microphone, and then you can do like a Fourier transform or like a difference equation basically on the source signal and the result signal, and then you get like a sonic signature of that thing. So you can do that to make reverbs of like a church. If you go in and like do a sweep of the church and then record the result and then do the convolution, you can get like the sonic sound of the church. That's how quite a lot of guitar cab sims are made, with that same basic idea. So you put a microphone in the position you want and then hit record, and then you get a thing. So I did that for my own cabinets, so that I could have like a facsimile of my precise gear in the digital domain, because I use like an obscure amp head that no model exists for, and the cabinets that I like were made in the 1970s by a company that no longer exists called Wasp, and they have speakers in that were made like 20 kilometers from my old house. So like none of this shit is possible to replicate any other way, so that's what I chose to do. And the byproduct of that is I don't have to put a mic on anything. So I'm happy to use the things because they sound more or less exactly as if I did, if I did choose to do that.
So in practical terms, that means instead of using like an in-the-box amp preset or distortion preset or whatever that you'd buy from like Easy Mix or whoever, you're using your own sounds, just the the modeled version of that sound.
Yeah. So the actual chain, not to like get too far out in the weeds, but I have a little reactive load made by Fryette amps. It's called a power station. Basically, it's like a power amp, but it's bolted onto a 200-watt reactive load that can replace a speaker. Because normally when you plug a tube amp into something without a speaker load connected, it will just blow itself up, because part of the way they're built is they need this sort of push and pull coming from the speaker. So the reactive load replaces the speaker, so there's no cabinets connected. And then that goes into my recording interface. And then in the track, in Reaper, in the DAW, there's a deconvolution reverb with my impulse of my cabinet loaded on top of it. So it's like the cabinet is within the DAW, pre-mic'd and immutable. So like I can't bump the mic because there is no mic. And everything, if I want it to, is dead silent. For practical purposes, it's me trying to make my rig dead silent without using like neural DSP or something. I want to use as much of my own gear as possible, but have it still be silent.
Gotcha. I think I followed as along as much as somebody who's only ever used like GarageBand and Pro Tools can follow along.
Oh look, yeah, it's pretty weird. It's weird stuff, but it's like this is the kind of shit that you get into like when you're on your own. You want to make these. It's just a slow like accumulation of things to make your own life a little bit easier.
Yeah. So I want to backtrack a little bit. First, going back to your orchestral days and studying composition. How did that experience shape the way you write songs for Convulsing? Like, what's your approach to composition?
It's still a bit like I wrote music before that time as well, but it was very kind of, how can I put it? It was very dull, like sort of depth 3 artifice of music. Like I really liked tech death when I was 15, because it was like exciting guitar playing, and like I learned to play Necrophagus like every, because an Epitaph came out in 2004, so I was like, oh my god, listen to this fucking sweep arpeggio. Oh my god. So I became really into that sort of guitar playing, because it was right at the perfect time for that. And this is 2004, 5, 6, 7, 8, where like just basically pre-YouTube, where you had, John Petrucci forums and stuff like that. So, and when I studied music a bit more formally in 2007 and 8, I was connected to the proper classical one. Because when I was in the orchestra, we just sort of played pop classics, like, a bunch of 11-year-olds playing the Star Wars theme in a
right, yeah.
Medium-sized orchestra. You know what I mean? Like, just it wasn't like capital C classical music. But one of the things that stuck with me most, and I'm noticing this more and more, I guess you can notice it more on the songs for Grievous, is evidently, subconsciously, I really took hold of the idea of sonata form. Because sonatas are composed in a very particular way, and I'm going to just like punch this into Google so that I don't fuck up the order of them. But it's like you establish an idea and then you develop it. It's like exposition, and then you develop the idea and then you recap the idea. But in between those things, you can have like additional modulations and detours before you move on into the next part of the form. And so the idea is that on a song like Relent, for instance, I open it with the exposition of the idea, and then we develop it slightly, or we add a little bit of material to it during the verse, and then I bring it back again for the choruses, and then we develop it a bit more in the next verse, and then the final version in the recap, it's more or less the same modal idea, it's the same material, but I've mutated it again. So that song in my head is like one riff that I just replayed in different ways. It's in the same key, it's sort of in the same tempo. It's the same sort of dyad movement where I'm just playing two notes, like two intervals at the time. There's no harmonies between the guitars. It's all very straightforward in my head. So that kind of composition I find myself doing a lot. And I did it on Perdurance quite a lot as well, where I like through composed stuff. Through composition being like where you start a song and you just keep adding adding riffs, and you never go back. You never revisit any material. You just keep going through the song to the end. And there's so much great music composed that way. But for whatever reason, I struggle to do it because I don't want to just throw away a perfectly good riff after 4 rotations. I want to see where else I can use it, how I can recontextualize it. Like, can I put a different drum beat over it? Can I chop parts of it out and like truncate it? Or can I extend it? Can I play it slower? Can I like play it in a different key? Can I reharmonize it? Like, I want to reuse the material. So there's lots of that kind of sonata-esque developmental composition in what I do. And I have no doubt that's from studying music more formally. Because you start to detect that stuff. You start to realize what's happening when you listen to music and you think about it in an arrangement and composition sense. And then you go, oh yeah, so that's why I like that, because they brought the riff back, but it was slower. You know, like that's the thing.
So instead of a traditional verse, chorus, verse kind of format, the sonata structure is more like a motif that gets repeated, but in different ways.
Not strictly, yeah, but the pop music comes out of the sonata form basically because it's kind of A B, A C, A B, A kind of forms. But what I'm using it to describe, I guess, is usually by the end of a sonata, it's a recap of the opening. It's something that happened at the start of the song that we're ending the song on, but it's been through a period of development, so something will be slightly different about it. So that's what I mean by that. And it's motific songwriting. It's sometimes called like leitmotif in progressive music, where you have like a theme that appears throughout like a 40-minute piece of music. Like, okay, so Edge of Sanity's Crimson.
Right, that's exactly what I was thinking of, yeah.
There's like 5 or 6 different themes. And so like whenever the soldiers who are like coming up with the plan to like go and find the princess, whenever they are speaking, there's that regal ass theme, like that's the motif that comes in when those guys are talking or they're doing something dramatic. So like those kind of compositional things are what I gravitate to.
So you were describing your approach to composition, and you explained the sonata approach that you use. I'm curious how you implement this. Do you write out a structure, or are you pretty intuitive in terms of coming up with riffs for your songs? Like, do you let it flow naturally that way?
Yeah, so I don't know. It's something I've been trying to understand for years. And it's not the only thing that influences me about classical composition. It's just a thing that a technique that I find myself using a lot because I like the way it helps me. Like, I like the results that it has when I do it. When I don't throw away ideas and try to mutate them as much as possible. And that's one of the ways that has appeared in classical music. It's also a feature of progressive music, like Gentle Giant prog rock, like that's what I mean. Or like, Porcupine Tree, which is one of my favorite bands ever. A lot of that sort of pop classical songwriting and arrangement is what I'm trying to use in death metal. But in terms of how, in the first place, a lot of it is just free improvisation. One of my biggest, this is no secret, one of my biggest musical inspirations is Alan Holdsworth. And I discovered him when I was maybe 16 or 17 because he frequently got mentioned as your guitar player's favorite guitarist, your favorite guitar player's favorite guitar player or whatever.
Like Thorndal, for example.
Yeah. I'll check this guy out. And I grabbed a live album that was recorded in 2002 or 3 or something. It's called All Night Wrong. And from the first chord, I was like, what the fuck? Like the heavens opened up. I was like, this is a warp portal to another dimension here where none of the rules of harmony exist. Nothing is forbidden. Everything is permitted. Somehow all of this apparent nonsense that he's playing makes sense here. And so part of a split part of my life outside of doing this kind of extreme music is just trying to become a better improviser. Hugely into jazz. I spend quite a lot of my time just improvising stuff, just trying to produce a complete song without stopping, just in the moment. Where does this thing, how can I make this flow as effortlessly as if it was a composition that I'd come up with? So I'm constantly sort of trying to do that better, and that I guess influences the way that I write for Convulsing or for any other sort of metal context. Is I'm trying to compose quickly and improvisationally without too much thought, so that I can surprise myself. I want to be surprised somehow. I want to do something that I haven't heard myself do before. And it's really hard to do that because you're the one doing it. Fundamentally, you can't. It's really hard to surprise yourself because you have to be conscious of what you're doing in some way.
Right.
So previous Convulsing records, I basically just sat in front of Reaper with my guitar and played riffs, or I recorded stuff that I was improvising one day, before work. I worked in a music store, so before my shift, I would just go fuck around on some guitars or whatever, or I'd be practicing with my other band. I was in a post metal band called Dumb Saint, so I'd be before we jammed, I would set all my shit up and just fuck around and record ideas, and then I would go back to them later and try and flesh them out into something. But that involved just sitting in front of a DAW and just hammering away for hours and hours and hours until something happened. This one, however, and that's true of everything from the first album till now. This album, however, I had to find a new process because of just the circumstances of my life are different. I have a partner, I have a house. Well, I rent a unit, I should say. No one in my generation is going to afford a house in this country, or any country really. And so the parameters that I have and the time that I have to invest in things like this have changed. So I can't just Sisyphean boulder roll, the album anymore. So I had to come up with a new way to do it. And the way that I chose this time was to write it as though it was sheet music. So I got Guitar Pro out and wrote everything in, often without my instrument being physically there. Like, it would be something I know how to play. I would just transcribe it into the notation and then completely arrange the song front to back in Guitar Pro, all the drum parts, all the bass parts, all the guitars, all the structure, do it all there. And that's what I did for this one. And I started doing it in April of last year. And by the end of June, I had 50 minutes of top to bottom, completely written and composed material. And that's the first time that I've ever worked that way.
So the album that we're talking about is called Perdurance, and we're having this conversation at the end of March, and you released it at the beginning of March. The way that you composed the album on Guitar Pro, was the finished recorded version, you said you like to surprise yourself with your own music. Was the finished recorded version surprising to you in any way compared to what you had composed?
Yeah, well, kind of. Like, I wrote it all in Guitar Pro out of sort of necessity. And so while doing that, you don't really get a sense of how things will sound precisely. Like, in the production of the last two records, I was kind of mixing it as I was going along, and I was hearing what more or less were the final guitar sounds and the final drum sounds, and like I was recording vocals as I went along, and just like, so the picture of the album was clearer throughout the process. But for Perdurance, I wrote it all in MIDI, and so I was literally listening to like Guitar Pro MIDI. I don't know if this is going to work because I'm trying to play it back from the computer that I'm using to have this conversation, but I can't even find them anymore. There it is. There's the debris folder. So at some point there was like literally like Guitar Pro MIDI. Just like fake MIDI sounds.
Right.
And that's what I listened to for months and months and months while I was arranging it and finalizing it, like writing lyrics and stuff and finalizing the parts. So the surprise came in hearing, like when I recorded the last note of the last layer on the last song, and I could play the whole thing back from top to bottom and listen to it as like a complete recording and go, God for that. It sounds like I hoped it would sound. that was the surprise, I guess. But I purposely left myself room, like all of the leads and the solos and stuff. I didn't decide what those were going to be in the software. It was all just like rhythm tracks and arrangements, and just like, so the three solos that I let myself play on this were improvised at the time, and then I retranscribed them back into the notation for the purposes of like remembering what I played. So that's the element of surprise there, was hearing the finished product line up with my expectations, or as close to them as I could get them to be. It's the struggle of any artist, is to have a positive relationship with your creation and not just criticize it, and try to move on as quickly as possible.
You talked about the way logistics and changes in your life necessitated a change in the way that you composed and recorded the music. But in terms of the actual songs and the music, did you go into this wanting to do anything different from the previous releases?
Yeah, I wanted to go back to playing more stuff. Like, I wanted to make Grievous is quite a simple record. It's loaded with like emotional stuff because and the context of it, because it was a pretty like miserable time. I didn't really have much. My life wasn't really like full of stuff at that time. Like my old band was kind of falling apart as priorities in our adult lives diverged. I was the youngest and the newest, so I had the most energy to keep it going, and the others sort of didn't. I lost my job in a kind of really, what's the word I'm looking for, like degrading way, where I was like fired. I don't think I'm under an NDA, but I was like sort of fired for spurious reasons abruptly, and I had to go through like a formal process to try and dispute the fact that I was fired for this particular reason. It's not like it was because there was an underpayment scandal at the time, and we'd all launched formalized cases against the business, me and all my coworkers, and so they just conjured reasons to get rid of us. to avoid having to deal with that. So at the time, I was really upset, just generally upset with the track my life was on, and it didn't feel very hopeful. So the music that I made for Grievous was really simple and sort of direct, like simple ideas, but just like violent lyrically, and like the vocal performance was a lot more intense than the previous one. So for this one, I don't really feel those things in the same way, but I have sort of a different attitude that I wanted to explore. And a lot of the music that I make is like self-directed criticism. Like you can read it in the lyrics to this album. The second track is literally about me never letting myself have a good time and always finding a way to punish myself for something. Like that's the point of that song, is to point out to myself how stupid that is. There's a mindset, and yet I can't let go of it. I want to whip my own back. So I wanted to preserve all of that stuff, but I wanted to sort of go back a bit in the way that I was writing music and write more involved compositions, and like go back to harmonizing my guitars again, like having different parts either side, and do a lot more counterpoint and just make things more dense and richer, just like really get into the minutiae of everything, like tighten every screw, explore every one of my whims while I was writing it, to try and make it as, as satisfying as I could make it without like overloading it with too many layers that if I had to perform this live, which I probably will, if I add like 17 guitar layers and synth tracks and like samples and stuff, that's just going to be a nightmare to reproduce it. So I tried to work within the rock format, but just like complicate each individual element to the point where it felt good. So that's like, I don't know if that made any sense, but that was the way that I was thinking about it. It's like, I want to make this like dense, but in a way but not in like a suffocating way, in a like, I'm using every finger on my left hand all the time when I'm playing the guitar. Like every chord has as many voices in it as I can cram in there that make it make sense, and like complicated rhythms that support the melody in some way and counterpoint, and just like I want it to be as full as I can make it, and as like at the limits of my skill set as I can make it, where the other one, the previous record, wasn't really. It was just like an emotional exercise.
Now you mentioned playing these songs live. At what point in the process do your bandmates who fill out the live lineup, when do they hear these songs?
When they want to. that's the simple answer. Or when I have them, I guess. Peter and Robin and I talk all the time. Again, like we're just friends. We just talk all the time. But I kind of like, I don't really like sending around demos and stuff too much, because I know what it's supposed to sound like and it's not that. And I don't want anyone to get attached to it. So I try to minimize the amount of time I spend doing that. But Peter, for instance, heard quite a lot of the stuff early on. I just sent him the Guitar Pro files for it and went, here's the album. I'm going to record it like in and around Alters touring. And Robin, I don't even know if Robin's listened to it, I'll be honest with you. I don't mind if he hasn't. He's a busy man. And it doesn't really impact him one way or the other, because none of the drums that are on the record that I so meticulously programmed, the performance of MIDI on there, none of that shit has much relevance to him. Like, he can play it or he can come up with something else. I couldn't give a shit when we play it live. If it sounds good, then it sounds good. It doesn't have to be the same. So I don't know if he's listened to it. He's usually just like too busy blasting for hire. But at the end of the day, he doesn't want to listen to more emotionally demanding death metal. He wants to listen to like Katy Perry and do a meme video of blasting over Katy Perry. So I show it to them occasionally, but usually it'll be at the end where I just go like, here's the whole album, and then we can work out how to play it later on when it's like in its final form.
At what point in the songwriting process do the vocals and the lyrics come in? Are they shaping the compositions, or do they come in when everything is quite complete?
It's usually at the end because I don't really like writing lyrics. I'm a literature. The other thing that I did in school more than like at the same sort of level as music was literature and English literature and stuff. But I'm really pedantic about the way that I write lyrics. I don't like to repeat words even. Like if I use the same word too many times in the song to describe the same concept, it annoys me. I don't really like doing it. So I usually leave it to last. I put it off as far as I can put it off because it's the most tedious part to like get it right, to get it to feel right. It's strange because I can spend 8 hours, and I did on one particular song, trying to play a guitar part correctly. But if I have to spend 8 hours sitting there with lyrics, I will just go mad because it's for some reason it's just not the same pattern. So I try to put it off. But I would like. I play at it all the time of like writing some prosaic thing and then writing a song to fit the lyrics so that it can like the arrangement can match. It can be shaped by the lyrical, like the cadence of the lyric. But I just can never do it. I can never. I need it, but it's funny though because it's almost like I don't need to because I come up with the titles at the very beginning. So the titles for all of the songs on everything I've ever done was the title that I gave the first tape of whatever idea became that song. And so in a way, the sensory information that I get when I'm writing it in the first place that gives me the title eventually gives me the lyrics. And they were always going to be that. Like it was always going to be a song about this thing. It was just I had to dig it up. Like I had to finish the track and then dig the lyrics out of the soil and find them after it was already done. It's weird. It's a weird feeling. Like the only song that I've ever done where I felt like it all came out at the same time was Were, which is like the middle track on Grievous. I cannot remember making it, basically. I can't clearly remember how long it took me, but I feel like it happened all in the one day and it was like start to finish and everything just went. That was it. Words, lyrics, performance, everything just came out in one, like my muse visited me and gave me the song on a platter. But that's the only time where it's happened all at once like that. Everything else has been kind of labored.
So as you mentioned, you mixed and mastered Perdurance yourself. I'm curious if you have an approach to mixing, if not your own music or convulsing, but in general, if you have a philosophy to what makes a good mix, or what should happen during the mixing and mastering phase?
I think it's prudent not to have one, or like not to be too attached to one. I get frustrated when I hear people who are engineers who will say like, you should never use an SM57 for anything. They're the worst microphone ever. Even Albini, who I respect immensely, has said this, like the SM57 is a horrible microphone. And I vehemently disagree. Not with the fact that it is a horrible microphone. It's a ubiquitous sound. And it's ubiquitous for a reason. Like every hammer has a nail. And like J.R. Hayes smashing one into the stage. Is that J.R.? What's the dude's name? Pig Destroyer. Man, I'm going to get so angry. You'll have to edit this out. It is J.R. Hayes. Oh my God. My brain worked for me. You can leave this in. Okay. that clip of him smashing the SM57 into the stage, you know, it's like good enough for him. What's wrong with SM57? Anyway, I digress. I think it's prudent not to have too many defined things that you do every time, because every artwork, regardless of if we're talking about music or not, it has its own identity and it has things it wants to say. And I think the best thing you can do as an engineer or someone who's trying to capture that is think about it like that's what you're doing, is you're trying to capture something that happened at a particular moment in time with a particular set of devices or instruments. And it should have its own identity. You shouldn't be trying to get the same snare sound every time. You shouldn't be trying to have the same vocal chain. Stuff to speed up your workflow is fine, but really my philosophy about it is listen to the tracks and like, what do they want? What is the sound of the thing? What's the most interesting thing that's happening in the sonic landscape of what you've recorded, and how can you exploit it, rather than think about techniques or like ways that you should work in because they're fun. You should be thinking about what serves the material. Sometimes it's nothing. Sometimes it's doing as little as possible and just like letting the performance do all the work. Sometimes you have to EQ things to oblivion and like distort them and clip them and like just ruin the dynamic range of the material, like brick wall limit everything. Sometimes you just have to do that, like, because that's what it's asking for. But if you don't listen, you won't know whether it's asking for it or not. You'll just do, rather than like have an intention and be reactive. So I guess that's my answer, is just be reactive rather than proactive.
So before we started recording, we had a little bit of discussion about how you've been releasing Convulsing's music by yourself for free on Bandcamp since the very beginning. I'm curious as to why, or maybe you can explain your philosophy on why you've been releasing your music for free.
The primary reason is I'm trying to summarize it because it gets pretty whimsical at times. The first one, I didn't think much of it. Like Errata, it's literally titled Errors, because I was kind of putting myself down in the title, saying like, here's a bunch of fucking shit decisions I made to record this dumbass music. Here you go, have it for free. And like some of the lyrics, I like the record. I like it. I don't want people to feel like I'm putting it down, and because a lot of people have written to me really sweetly and been like, this thing is so precious to me, and it helped me through like dark periods of my life and all that stuff. It's amazing to get messages like that. Like, it's really touching. So I don't want anyone listening to this to feel like I'm destroying something that is precious to them. But to me, it feels really juvenile because I know how the sausage was made. Like, I know a lot of the lyric choices that I made were just like taking the piss, to use the English Australian idiom of like some of the lyrics for like Invocat and like 11 Sigils are just nonsense. They're just literal nonsense. It's me like doing a parody of like, summon Satan, come unto me, Satan, into my flesh. Like it's
Lords of Death, I summon you.
Yeah, stuff like that. So like, but there's other songs on that. By the end of the record, I worked out like I'd lost whatever was preventing me from being honest had disappeared. So like the last track on the record, Dragged, is where like we're getting into some shit there, where I'm like going, okay, I'm going to talk about depression here, like how it actually feels. And some of the other things are a bit more metaphorical, like Severed Hemispheres is about, I was listening to a podcast, a dude called CGP Grey, because I was a warehouse worker, so I listened to a lot of podcasts at the time. And he was talking about split brain phenomenon, which is like a treatment for epilepsy or some other schizophrenia, some various kinds of mental disturbances. You can treat it by separating the hemispheres of your brain physically, like you have surgery and you cut it and sever a link. And you can have these strange artifacts where the left side of your body will move and do stuff and reach for objects that you aren't conscious of. And you're in control of your right half, and your left hand will just like pick up a book or something, and you weren't even thinking about doing that. But you were. You just like aren't conscious of you thinking about it because your brain has been modified. So there's a few songs like that. But everything shifted after that point into like exploring my emotional states, because I find that like a big thing that I want in music and in art is vulnerability. I want to feel like someone's telling me something sincerely, and it isn't like they're not insulting my intelligence or whatever by like songs about skeletons, and like I'm not putting anyone down here. I love Undeath, for instance, like where they're going like, this next song is about digging up a corpse and strapping a gun to it. Like, I love all that shit. It's great. Those songs are all well and good, but the kind of thing that I really am interested in and that I really wish there was more of is people like being super vulnerable and emotional and like the kind of things that you can't usually get in metal. You can get in like indie and emo music and like some pop music and electro and stuff. I'll be honest, I've forgotten what my point, or like what question I was answering.
Well, in terms of releasing the music for free.
Oh yeah, okay, sorry, that's right. It was because I didn't think much of it at the point of Errata. So it was juvenile, and so that's why it started. But now that I do think about, I still don't think that much of it because it's part of this self-flagellating artist thing where you just hate everything you make, whether you want to or not. But now it's more about the machinery of music making. I really dislike advanced tracks and teasers and like marketing promo and like pre-release stuff. To me, it's like hanging a painting in a gallery and exposing the bottom left corner of it for 6 months and then saying, come back to see the full work in September. The painting's right there behind the curtain. Like, just reveal it, just show it. So I did a split after Errata with a band called Siberian Hell Sounds, and we did which we tried to do like a press cycle for it. Sort of, I didn't really want to, but we did. And it was just a deeply unsatisfying experience. And then while I was teeing up to do Grievous, I was asking people, like, did any proper labels want to put it out, blah, blah, blah. We worked out a few different ways of doing it, and ultimately it all fell through just because of the differences in my philosophy about the whole project. I want it to be $0 if that's what you want to pay for it. If you want to pay for it, go for it. But I want it to be free, and I want it to be instant, and I want it, like, as soon as you find out that it exists, I want you to be able to hear all of it and engage with all of it, and in whatever way you want. Like, download it, burn it to a CD and play it in a Discman, like put it on a USB stick and play it in your car, listen to it in a big sound system in your house. Like, I want it to be as free as possible and as instant as possible. And it's not really compatible with the machinery of recorded music and metal music generally to do it that way. There's only been a few bands who have done it like that successfully. Like Krallis is one of them. Radiohead is another one who did it briefly. And Bandcamp was emergent at the time, and it was a perfect way to do that. I just like put it up while I was eating my breakfast, set it to $0, said, hey everyone, I told some of you I was making an album, here it is. And the rest of it just takes care of itself. And to this day I feel that's the best way to do it, for this project anyway. We play a bit more of the industry games in Alters, but for this project, I can't, because it's so much me, down to the last, like, every element is philosophically something dear to me. I can't release music any other way than the way that I've been doing it. If Bandcamp didn't exist, it would be for free on my website or something.
few years ago. I don't know if I actually finished the blog post or I just said it on the podcast, but I made the proclamation that we're going to witness the end of bands in our lifetime because of the changes that we've seen, both on the recording side and in the distribution side. And I think Convulsing is maybe the perfect example of what I'm talking about, where you yourself as a composer and as an engineer can write and record your music with, without anyone's aid and without the need to make compromises to anybody else's idea of what your music should sound like. And you can release the music, for free if you want, or for a price if that's also how you want. And, if you want to do merch or, physical releases, stuff like that, and I'm sure you could find a way to crowdsource it if that's what you're interested in doing. And it's, we haven't seen huge changes in the ecosystem other than, the way Spotify has basically disinclined everyone from actually buying music.
Yeah.
But, other than that, I think what we're going to see is more people are going to follow the path that you're on now, which is...
I hope so.
This is my music. This is how I want it to sound. And, for the people who are interested, here's where you can find me. Yeah,
I think I'm aware of the time ticking down, so I'm respectful of your time. It is a very... We'll avoid getting into the Spotify question, but in terms of, I firmly believe the barrier to music and art generally should be as low as possible. So that applies to, recording tech. I'm not against any of this, amp modeling, digital recording tech. I don't care that every person can produce in Ableton. I don't care that there's a billion solo artists on SoundCloud. I think it's all really good because I think it should be as accessible to people who want to create as possible. And most of the arguments against that are just perpetuated by old world dicks who just need to get a grip about the young people found a way to make art without you. Some of them have recognized that. Albini is technically an oldie worldy kind of guy at this point to a lot of people. At least he's in the generation above me. And he fully embraces all this stuff. He's it's great that everyone's doing this. He's not gatekeeping anyone from this. Spotify, the problem with Spotify is not that it has disincentivized people from buying music. It's that it has robbed, I guess, it's converted it into the plaything of a tech bro capitalist. The artists are aligning the pockets of this other organism. So even if they could make money off of it, it's not them they're making money for. And it's changed the attitude towards listening to music quite dramatically. And there are people who've refused to my record is free, right? You can go download it right now for free. I encourage you to. I've had people say that they won't listen to it unless it's on Spotify because it's too hard to download it for free. You put your email in a box, hit OK, and you get a master quality FLAC of the entire record with all of my lyrics and all it, and I'll give you the transcriptions of it. The only way I can make this easier for you is if I drove to your house and gave you a USB stick with it on. And even then that'd probably be a bit harder because then you have to put it in your computer and listen. So it's the attitude towards music consumption and the function of music and the legitimacy of music as art has changed in the last 10 or 15 years, the last 50 years, depending on how far back you want to go. So I think that's the problem. I wouldn't be here without piracy. I wouldn't be here without SoulSeek and peer-to-peer file sharing and stuff, and being able to download Edge of Sanity's discography when I was 15 and listen to Unorthodox and go, cello in death metal, what the fuck? I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be here. So Spotify as a substitute for that, sure, whatever. I don't consider that to be a problem. But it's all the other stuff that it does is the problem. And merchandise and stuff and where you can find me online will tie this in, I guess. I'm not averse to making merchandise and physical products and stuff but it's an afterthought. It's something that I do sort of as a bonus for having completed the artwork in the first place. So I'll do t-shirts and stuff and I'll reprint some of the old designs and I'm working on that now. And I'm hoping to do a 2LP because I kind of have to for this record. It's too long. And all of those things will happen and I don't have any aversions to doing that. But that's the afterthought. I'm not thinking about withholding the release of the album until the LP is manufactured or anything like that. I don't want to do that. I just want to like give it as quickly as possible to, as soon as it's done, hit send. That's basically what I did with this. And I want to be as contactable and available to people who are engaging with my work as possible. I want you to be able to email me and talk to me and ask me these questions, like anything you want. If you want to know how it's played, I want to be able to show you. I don't want you to have to pay for that. If I can avoid it, I'll like record you a video of how I play the riff and send it to you, and we can talk about it. And so that's why I do it this way. So I want all of those things. I want to talk about art. I don't even care if it's mine. I just want these kind of conversations, and podcasts like this, for instance, is where I can get into it. It's the reason to live, man. And so, yeah, that's why this way. That's why no Spotify. That's why Bandcamp only. That's why free, is because I want to connect with people that way, as genuinely and as like evenly and equally as I can. I'm just a guy. And so that's ultimately what I'm trying to communicate, is that, especially with this record and the themes of the record, are like, this is what life is like for me, and maybe it's like it for you. And I want to communicate that honestly. And if it is like that for you and you've heard it, you can understand what I'm saying, and you want to talk to me about it, send me an email. That's like, I would love nothing more.
So Brendan, would the Bandcamp page be the best place to get the music and the merchandise?
Yeah. I'll post everything that I make and that I have access to with my own two hands on convulsing.bandcamp.com. But there are labels that I've partnered with for physical stuff. Total Dissonance Worship, Simon, is one of those people. We've been friends for years. I was a big fan of his old band called War for a Harlot's Mouth. From a Harlot's Mouth, rather. Oh,
man, I saw those guys. No kidding. I had no idea that they were related.
Yeah, so Simon and Paul, the drummer for that band, Simon was the guitar player, formed Nightmare.
Okay.
And Simon formed Total Dissonance Worship basically to be Nightmare's label. Like, that was kind of the way he intended it to go. But he started it by releasing other band stuff, sort of as a soft launch. And yeah, I mean, I was lucky enough to play on the Nightmare record, so we're very connected in terms of our working and artistic, like, creative and relationships. And in a business sense, Simon has very kindly repressed. The original pressing of the record was done by an Australian label called Impure Sounds. Brock and Rich run that. And they reached out to me and said, hey, we want to do vinyl of both of your records. We think they should be on vinyl. So I was like, okay, sure. And we did a short run. It was like 100 copies each or something like that of the original ones. And then when they were repressed, I said, hey, look, okay, Simon's in the US. Let's try and get these to a few more people. Let's do like a collaborative run where Simon can press some for the US and have exclusives for there, and we'll have exclusives for Australia. And so that went well. So we did it again. And I think the pressing for Errata is finishing up in the next couple of days. Like, Simon will go pick them up from the plant the next couple of days. It's pressed in Oregon. So they'll be fresh. The Grievous copies should be shipping to people who've already bought them, and I'll get a few, and they'll be out there. And you don't have to pay $160 on Discogs or whoever or wherever, like, to access it. The shirts and like wearable stuff is the one that I've always been pretty lax on. I tend to do like 40 shirts. Like, I'll do a quick little pre-order thing and just to get quantities, and then only print the quantities that people buy. So there's very few of those out there, but I want to try and fix that just because I'm conscious of the amount of people who want them. And it feels like I'm depriving people of stuff, even though I'm a bit anti-consumer capitalism. Like, I don't want to make too many of a thing to, like, we've got enough junk on this, like, you know. That's why I don't make CDs. We've got enough plastic. At least vinyl has like the artwork is at least bigger, like on a record than on a dual case CD. And cassette and vinyl are both things you can't just sort of make in an afternoon in your house. Or cassette maybe, but like there's a bit more artistry that goes into that than just like pressing a CD. So you probably won't find any CDs anytime soon unless I really have my arm twisted. But there'll be tapes and vinyl and stuff appearing on Bandcamp and on Total Dissonance Worship's label page, and in Impure Sounds if you're an Australian local. So there'll be things floating around. And
besides the Bandcamp page, how else can people follow Convulsing online, maybe find out about tour dates and things like that?
There's currently no shows planned, but that's the way this band goes. The Bandcamp is still a good one if you like spend any amount of money on the record. I think Bandcamp paywalls this, not me. You'll get an email when I make one of those community announcements, and I'll usually say something in there if I'm going to play shows. Otherwise, you can just search my name in your search engine of choice and then add me on Facebook or send me an email through the contact form or follow me on Instagram, I guess. It's at BRNDANWS over there. And I'm probably more active there than I am anywhere else because I can post video content really easy about just like playing silly guitars. A lot of it is not metal. It's just mostly me like messing around, trying to play fusion or whatever. So be warned. But I'm pretty easy to find. And as I was saying, I want to be contacted. I want to make stuff that says something about me in a way that like helps me exercise a feeling or something, that traps my thoughts in art so that like I can be rid of them. But I want, if it connects to people, I want them to be able to find me and talk to me about it, and I want to share something like that with people in this way. So I try to be public and open as much as possible. I could never be in an anonymous band because I want to engage about this stuff as much as I can. So I'm pretty easy to find. Search my name. Been on the internet a long time, so pretty easy.
Do you want to say anything about any other projects you have?
Alters are going back to the US. We got very insane visa costs to go there last year, and we, while booking that, we asked about playing over at MDF in like the pre-show or something, and just to try and strengthen our case for getting the visas in the first place. We were like, could we play MDF next year? And we got offered a slot. So we're going back to play MDF, and we'll do like a run of shows in May, starting in Philly. And for the first half, we play with a band from Washington State called Goetia. I think some of them are in Genocide Pact and a few other bands. But they're fairly new. And there's a bunch of shows with we link up with other tours going around for MDF, like with Ascended Dead and with Catalyst and Esoteric. And about halfway through the tour, Aberration from friends from Indianapolis. And about halfway through the tour, Artificial Brain jump on. And then we continue the rest of the tour with Artificial Brain.
That's awesome. Those are friends of mine.
Yeah, I mean, they're friends of mine too, technically, but I've only met Oleg. I've known several of them for years, but I only got to meet half of the people I've known from internet. Like last year at Vitus, basically all of New York very kindly came out to hang out with me. so I met so many people that I felt like I'd known for 10 years already, and it was like the first time meeting them. Really weird sensation. So we're going back, and it means I get to hang out with the rest of them. I get to meet Sam and hang out with Dan a bit more. So I'm looking forward to that. And yeah, we finish up at MDF, play the pre-show, and we'll be hanging around the fest for a couple of days until our visas expire on day 3, so I don't get to watch Bloodbath or anything. I have to go home, otherwise I'm an overstayer, infidel. And that's that. But that's basically the only thing that's coming up, is Alters goes back to the US, and I get to clonk around on a bass guitar and scream at people again while I'm there.
Very cool. So you've been very generous with your time, but is there anything else you want to say?
I could talk for 9 more hours, so thanks for corralling me where you could. And yeah, if anybody does want to talk about anything, frankly, especially if it's like something that some sort of artistic pursuit you're on, even if you just want to talk about your own music or some sort of struggles or anything. If there's anything that I can offer anyone or anything I can help people with as a musician or as a figure, whatever capacity I have in this landscape, reach out to me and I'll give it to you if I can. What's mine is yours.
Very cool. Thanks so much, Brendan.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.